will be recorded for your classmates. Okay, so here we go. The topic tonight is assessment and a focus on literacy. Some of these topics you may have seen and heard in your other classes, and as a learner yourself, you've gone through assessment, but let's get really focused on elementary literacy assessment. Can you see the little video of me in the corner, by the way? You guys should be able to see me. Our last webinar is Tuesday, November 28th. That's almost a month from now. Same time, back to Tuesday. And the topic is kind of bringing it all together, the big picture for literacy lesson planning. And I'm going to actually pull a few examples from local school districts. And so we'll look at some ways that the different districts do it. I taught in Austin ISD, and they kind of had a certain way of doing lessons, and I really liked it. They used kind of templates for all their lessons, and it was just kind of a fill in the blank thing. And they had lots of examples and guides and things for teachers. I really loved it. So I want to share a little bit of that with you, and I'll find some more examples, but wanting to connect to the real world, so to speak. So our objectives are here. They're the same for every single one. I started this webinar series because I know that as new teachers, one thing you need is confidence with lesson planning, and it's so hard to just walk into a classroom and student teach or teach on your own without confidence. Would you guys agree? Like, it's really hard, and as new teachers, you feel like, what am I doing? How do I design a lesson? And so I just wanted to get really fundamental with everybody about building confidence. And the more it's just like with anything, it's going to sound silly, but the more you do it, the more confident you feel. So don't be afraid of lesson planning. I want you guys, that first objective is kind of the main one, to boost confidence. And really, I've always been a big believer that the more you can look at lesson plans and analyze them and break them down into parts, the less nervous you feel about lesson planning. Also, I want you guys to be tech savvy, because the world is becoming tech savvy. And so you need to be able to use those skills in your lesson planning. So I try to kind of weave that in. So one review slide for us, and this is so important, especially for new teachers, is just that alignment thing we've been working on. So kind of it's a three-part thing. So you've got your objectives, and then you want your instruction to match those objectives that you set out. In this case, in this class, it's ELAR, English, who knows what that stands for? English Language Arts Reading. And then figure 19 is our comprehension strategies. And then your instruction. So we've got the I do, we do, you do format of scaffolding, modeling, I do, guided practice, we do. And then you do, and trying in there in the instruction to have technology-focused learning. That's where the world is heading and is now. Assessment, that's our topic for tonight. Examples are rubrics. Checklists are good. Students can self-assess using those checklists, especially older students. But even younger students can self-assess their work. And then learner-centered assessment. We don't want everything to just be the teacher grading everything. And then writing is also a way to assess students, and graphic organizers. So we'll see examples. By the way, I'm going to try to wrap up by 8:30 tonight, keeping it short and sweet. So I wanted to review something that confuses a lot of people, and that's the difference between an anchor chart, which you use to teach with. You might, if you're taking notes, you may want to jot this down. Anchor charts are used for modeling and instruction and used to refer to during instruction. And typically, graphic organizers are more often used for assessment, like a blank graphic organizer, like a concept map, could be used for students to fill in main ideas, right? And so you give them the graphic organizer, it's blank, and you expect them to kind of fill it in. It helps them organize their thinking, but it's also something you can use to informally assess. Have you guys seen, let's pause for a minute to type in the chat window. Have you guys seen graphic organizers being used for assessment with students? I've seen them used a lot for daily kind of stuff, for reading especially. But they could be used for writing as well. You want to see that students can plan their writing using a graphic organizer. That's a great way to see if students can plan their writing instruction. Anybody type in the chat window. Did you used to organize your thinking on a graphic organizer? So in a way, you could see at a glance if the student has enough ideas to generate their story or essay. So that's kind of a way to use it in writing, but more often graphic organizers are used in reading. So just that difference between, and I encourage you to use anchor charts in your teaching. There's tons on Pinterest. Just we've talked about this, I think. Go to Pinterest and type in anchor charts for teaching reading or anchor charts for teaching writing and start collecting. And same with graphic organizers. Just go to Google and pick graphic organizers for assessing reading. Hello, yes, I have as a student as well, the blank ones. Yes, and if you don't want to use worksheets, you can use a couple other tools like Poplet or Bubbles. Poplet is one people like to use in this class for the guided reading lesson plan assessment. So let's review. Put yes, no, or so in the chat window. Do you know what these terms mean? So when we talk about informal assessment, we're really talking about daily assessment or weekly assessments, like Friday assessments, just your everyday classroom-based assessment. When we talk about formal assessments, we're talking more about standardized testing, like the STAR test, or diagnostic tools like IQ testing, those kinds of things. Some gifted and talented, kinds of assessments might be more formal. So really we think of assessment in terms of informal, day-to-day classroom-based, or formal, which is more like standardized testing, which is just maybe a few times a year, spring or whatever, or diagnostic testing for learning disabilities kinds of things. So those are kind of our two categories. And then there's some more definitions. Did anybody put in the chat window if you're familiar with these terms? Formative assessment is ongoing assessment. So your day-to-day assessment, right? So formative means ongoing. And so if I test spelling a list of words and I want to see if they know these words, that's more formative. Or if I look inside students' writing notebooks to see if there's any progress in their writing, that's more formative. Whereas summative is more like at the end of a unit. So every 6 weeks or every 9 weeks, we kind of do some summative assessments. And that means those are more final assessments. Your final exam in a course is a summative assessment. So you'll hear these words thrown about a lot. So become familiar with them, look them up further online. And then the diagnostic test is sort of drilling deeper. So students who you suspect have a learning disability might be referred to a team, a student study team, to decide if they want to get parent permission and stuff to do some further diagnostic testing. So usually it's students you suspect of having a disability, a learning challenge or difference, and you want to do some diagnostic testing. There's one more I didn't include on here. I'll type it in the chat window, and that's a screening assessment. So a screening assessment is a very global, holistic sort of it's not really holistic, but it's more a global test. It doesn't drill as deep as a diagnostic test, but it might give you some indicators that a student might be at risk. So you might do a screening for dyslexia, but it's not an in-depth test. It just might be a few indicators that further testing is needed. So think of health screenings. We do health screenings all the time, and then they say, oh, you need to go get further testing. So screening assessment is also used. Do these terms make a little bit more sense? Definitely write them down, look them up. They're really crucial. You'll sound like a teacher when you start using these terms when you're talking about assessment. So, okay, just a couple more terms. You might want to look on the actual PowerPoint to see the purple part. Sorry, it's a little tricky to read. We also have pre-assessments. So at the beginning of a unit or a novel, you might want to do a pre-assessment to get a baseline understanding. It's just kind of quick. So getting a pre-assessment is like a quick assessment of student understanding of what you're going to present. There's different ways to do this. Some examples are on the bottom. Assess students' knowledge of poetry based on quick writes and class discussions. So that would be what informal assessment. It's not something you're going to actually sit there and grade and give a 92 on it. Assess students' knowledge of biographies based on discussion. Again, that's informal, very holistic assessment, but it's still considered a pre-assessment. Make note of how many students seem to have an understanding of biographies, as well as assess students' attitudes and understanding of poetry. I like to do pre-assessments with writing because it's something that I can collect. So if I was going to do a unit with fifth graders on biography, I might have them write and say, tell me everything you know about biography. And so I could scan through those quickly and get an understanding of where they're at. I would probably do that online now instead of with actual paper, Google Forms or something like that. So does that make sense? So pre-assessment, this is a holistic way to kind of get at where students are at. More typically with guided reading, you get their reading baseline scores at the beginning of the year, and you set up your groups. So that's a little more formal. I'm going to skip this slide, but I want to show you guys rubrics. So what do you guys know about rubrics for assessment? I think they're great. They're informal. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. So type what you know about rubrics. They're really used a lot in writing instruction. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Okay. Say yes when you can see my screen that says Ruby Star. And I think I put the link in the chat window. So just type yes. Okay. Someone said, I use rubrics to self-evaluate or self-assess myself. Okay, awesome. Great. I love it. So with Ruby, who's used Ruby Star? So let's say you want to assess writing. So you go to Ruby Star, click writing. Let's see. Okay, so you can assess all kinds of things: class debate, role play, interview, puppet show, storytelling. I love it. Let's go over to research and writing. Letter writing. Let's say you're teaching letter writing to your students and you want a rubric. You can generate one here. And let's scroll down to the actual rubric. So there's different criteria. Look at all the parts that you might want to evaluate. So each criteria goes in a different category. And then, so let's just say grammar and spelling, because when you assess writing, grammar and spelling are part of it. So you can see it's 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's a great way to assess, or you could reverse it 1, 2, 3, 4, low to high. And it fills it in for you. I love this. And you can change it around. So you can add to it. You can, add some descriptors in here, just kind of tweak it. Every teacher loves to tweak things, I think. And so you can just use the drop down. Maybe neatness is really important for you. The envelope, So does anyone use envelopes anymore? Salutation and closing. So you decide the criteria and it fills it in for you. And I think this is great for new teachers because you can get a little help along the way. It's a rubric generator, and so use Ruby Star, and it's got all kinds of subjects. Look, literature circles, reading. Now it doesn't have everything on here, but it's a good, it can help you learn how to make a rubric of your own. Do you guys have Dr. Owens? She's a friend of mine and we talk a lot. I know that Dr. Owens loves digital storytelling. Like that's one of her favorite things to teach, she told me. So you could go in here and make a rubric for digital storytelling. Like, let's see, soundtrack, right? Images. So I'll click images. And it's got this, just these descriptions of the images. So anyway, you guys get the idea. Is that what you use on us? No, I've actually made up my own rubrics. But I think this is a great resource for y'all. What do you guys think? about this rubric generator. Yeah, so use it. You can use it for this guided reading lesson plan if you want. I think you can make one from scratch too. Just click create rubric, and you can use this for other classes too. I mean, I don't see why not. Just put made from Ruby Star on it. What did I just click on? Let's see. Oh, create new rubric. Okay. So anyway, check out Ruby Star. I'm going to stop and go back to where we were. If you have any more thoughts on it, just the link is in the PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint is on Blackboard. So give me a second to kind of get back to where I was. Okay, so we were talking about rubrics. You can also just go on Pinterest or Google and type in, rubric for guided reading or rubric for, and then just kind of, see what's out there online. And when you're in your learning mode and you want to see more examples. Okay. So we looked at rubrics. I'm going to just share a few more examples with you guys. So you can look at these on your own, but they are assessment tools from Read Write Think. I'm just going to put the link in the chat window. I'm not going to share my screen on this, but do go through and check it out. It's got things like editing checklists and essay rubrics, exit slips. So you guys may have done an exit ticket in your own school days. I know Dr. Amaro does this thing where students have to type an exit idea on Twitter. So she does Twitter exit slips. But exit slips are a good one. So check those out. A lot of them are rubrics. Some are checklists. I would say rubrics and checklists are your best friend for informal assessment. There's another type of assessment where you take written notes, and those are called anecdotal notes, but I personally think that they're too time-consuming and difficult for first-year teachers to actually, walk around with a clipboard and take notes on all the students. Like, it sounds great. Have you guys heard of anecdotal observations? But it's really hard to do that as a first-year teacher. So I would do anecdotal descriptions or observations of students maybe in your second year. And I don't say that to be offensive or anything, but I just think it's not something a first-year teacher would want to do when you're just trying to manage it all. Yeah, they do take a long time to do. Now, if you're tutoring or something, that's different. If you're working one-on-one with a student, that's a lot different. But if you have 20 to 30 kids, just taking time to do that is a skill to work towards, I think. So anecdotal notes are good, but a lot of times it's easier just to work with the interventions and assessment tools we have on hand. By the way, as a new teacher, invite in the instructional coach and ask them to help you when you're giving some of these beginning of year assessments. And the best question to ask as a new teacher is, what assessments do I have to do, right? Like to not get in trouble. That's always your goal as a new teacher. It's like, what am I supposed to do? What am I required to do for assessments, and do those, because they'll ask you for that data, and you've got to look organized. I had a spreadsheet. I wish I still had copies. An Excel spreadsheet where I took all of the data they gave me from my third graders from their end of second year data, and I put that all in columns on an Excel spreadsheet. And then I took all my beginning of year data and put that on a spreadsheet. And then I had a one-page Excel spreadsheet where I had all the students in the class and all their data on one sheet. And it was just so helpful to be able to pull that up and to have all of their fluency scores, comprehension scores, standardized test scores on one sheet. So I recommend, just even if they don't tell you, make a data sheet, put all your students' names on it, get all the data from their last year's end of year data, and then start organizing on your own. So why do we use data? To teach. And use the term data-driven instruction in your job interview. So data, I'm a data-driven teacher. I collect data, I analyze data, I use that data to inform my teaching and make instructional decisions that informs my lesson planning. I then reflect on my teaching and then begin the cycle again. So that's your job interview little thing to say, and that's based on that chart. So types of data are your beginning of year baseline data. Those are typically informal kinds of data that you collect on students. And then we have our beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year benchmarks. These are just things I've seen and done in my 8 years of elementary teaching. Standardized testing data is, in my days, it was the TAKS test, but now it's the STAR test. Upper grades will have more of that. And they're starting to test kids younger and younger on standardized testing. So kind of frowny face on that, but it's, still the order of the day. And then progress monitoring would be like students who need additional intervention. You do something called progress monitoring where you track how they're doing. So those are kind of the types of data, and we use it to inform our teaching. So here's an example of tracking student data. This would be progress monitoring. So this is from helloliteracy.com, like Hello Kitty, but helloliteracy.com. And so this is a fluency graph, and I've seen this used a lot. Put it in a file folder, staple it, have one on each kid. And then each week you time them, and they read to you one-on-one for a minute. And then they track it, and they can use a crayon or marker to track their fluency, and you're looking for growth over time. This is the perfect type of data to use, especially on students where you're concerned about their literacy and you want to track it. And the student can see where they're at. So what do you think about this graph where the student is involved in tracking their own data? And that's really big in schools right now. I don't know. There may be a fluency program called Fast Track. I haven't heard of it. There's a couple of computer-based fluency programs that students can use, and it may be able to track them on that. But this is just kind of old school paper. It really is helpful, and students love it when they can see their progress. And fluency is easy because you just use a stopwatch, and you can even use your, if you have a wristwatch or your cell phone now, and time them for a minute, and then you count the number of words they can read in a minute at that grade level. So it's great to track fluency because you can visibly see their progress. Okay, so teachers are busy collecting data, analyzing data, and taking action. That's just kind of another way to say this using data to inform your teaching, and that's your goal with data. Okay. You can just read this on your own, but this is just some vocabulary about data. So you can just go back and read that on your own. So a few more tips. Spreadsheets. Who can use Excel? I definitely recommend learning the very basics of Excel. I think that's in Dr. Owen's class. Really pay attention to that because you can track student data. And include more than one data source. You don't want just one data source. You would never just set up learning groups based on their standardized test scores. You want fluency scores, comprehension scores. They even have tests to look at student motivation and things like that. And so you want as many measures as you can. Think multiple measures. And then a few more tips are in there. Okay. I think I already have that one. This slide, it's on Blackboard. Click on each one. These are the criteria that you can use to analyze and assess student writing. The 6 traits are ideas, organization, voice, word choice, sentence fluency, conventions, and presentation. And the source is on the bottom. But do look at these. These are clickable, and you can read more about the 6 traits of writing. The STAR test rubric is really based on the 6 traits of writing. You'll see some similarities. So do look at that. And I think that's it. There's a few more tips from Dr. Mohan Pant. He teaches in our graduate school, and he just has some ways to think about data too for you to look at on your own, and you can email him. I'm going to wrap up by sharing a few ideas that we can apply to our assignment, your guided reading lesson plan, which you're working on just the outline this week. And I picked some resources for you guys on Blackboard. I hope to have your other work graded by tomorrow. So, but keep in mind, guided reading is small group. Sometimes people forget that we're not teaching the whole class during guided reading. It's usually 3 to 8 students. You're only meeting with them for a short window of time. It's usually like 20 minutes. And so you've got to keep your assessment short and sweet and simple and connected to whatever it is you're teaching. So some tips for you are pick your comprehension focus from figure 19. Pick one focus like main idea or connecting or drawing conclusions. Those are really popular ideas for the lesson plan. And then make your own anchor chart. Remember, the anchor chart is for teaching. That's the I do part. So your anchor chart is when you would model the what, why, when, and how of your strategy. For example, main idea or making connections. You explain it, model it, and then you model that with the anchor chart, and then you want to assess it. So I suggest a graphic organizer. So if you're doing main idea, you could find or make a main idea graphic organizer and have students write the main ideas of whatever it was they read in guided reading. And it needs to align with your comprehension focus. It doesn't have to be a worksheet. It could be like a Poplet or Bubble S. You can also, let's look at the third bullet point. They could also write in a journal. So let's say you're doing making connections. And so you could have students write and list maybe 5 text-to-self connections they made after reading during guided reading group. They can do the assessment back at their seats. So even though they're coming to you for guided reading, the assessment part doesn't have to take place at the table. It can be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We'll start the graphic organizer as a group. We'll do the first one together. And then I want you all to work on filling in the rest of the graphic organizer at your seat, identifying the other main ideas from the chapter we just read in Esperanza Rising or whatever book that you're doing. So does that make sense? So you need to think of a really good assessment that's student-centered, something they can do on their own that you've prepared them to do in that guided reading session. So you can create, yes, you can make your own anchor chart on Publisher or Adobe Photoshop. Those are all wonderful. Yes, perfect. Good idea. I have some ideas for you guys on guided reading. If you haven't already done so, you can follow my Pinterest board on guided reading. You don't have to, obviously. And I'll be adding, I think I'll make a board on there for assessment to add to it based on kind of some of the ideas in here and some of the things I've used as a teacher. Remember, I was a classroom teacher and a reading specialist. So some of the things that really worked for me, I'll find those. Like something I've done is comprehension bookmarks, and that helps students to think about comprehension, and it looks like a bookmark and things like that. So I will set that up soon. And do you guys have any ideas you want to share? What ideas about assessment do you want to share? You can type those in the chat window or raise the virtual hand. It's down on the bottom of the screen. If not, what do you want to learn more about? So use these little prompts and type something in the chat window for our exit. So I hope to explore more about blah, 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 or I learned, I want to try, I want to know. Something we did not talk about is a lot of districts are using the computer for assessment. So taking quizzes online, posting their work online, to something kind of like Blackboard. So we didn't talk about that, but that's another whole aspect of assessment, is that a lot of schools are using technology for students to take tests. I think one day standardized testing will be totally done on computers, right? So that's something we didn't mention. So maybe you can explore more about assessment using technology. So type your exit ticket into the chat window right now using one of these prompts. And then I'll look for that, and then we'll wrap up. So I hope to explore. I learned, I want to try, or I want to know. Go ahead and type that for yourself. Okay, I want to try making my own anchor charts and rubrics. Great. Excellent goal. And again, the best way to learn how to do that is look at examples of other people's. Also, I've been in classrooms where teachers have way too much stuff on the wall. So be, strategic about that, about what you put on the wall. And also think about how can you use things like iPads, and things like that for students to see things on them also for your teaching. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. And the last webinar is on the big picture. So I'll talk about, beyond the lesson plan, units of study. So when you plan something for a week or 3 weeks or longer, with the focus on literacy, I want to talk about writing instruction especially. Collaborative lesson planning with Google Docs, software. So now we'll be getting more into technology. Software tools for lesson planning, LMSs, that means learning management systems like Canvas, Google Classroom, and Schoology. I'm going to share examples and kind of where we're heading with the big picture. Again, a lot of schools are using computers for assessment. And there's something called iStation you guys should look up. Some schools are using, it's actually like this, iStation, are using that for assessment. Okay, so I hope to explore more about formative assessment examples. Great, and that's something you can just Google. Daniel, you can type in literacy and formative assessment and just see what comes up. I learned where to go find great examples of rubrics. Yeah, tell all your friends about Ruby Star, it's free. And I think that's it, you guys. I'm going to stop the recording.